So let's move on again, as I mentioned, to what might be the most important element of our lesson in section 2, and this is our condensed plot summary, right? What does the word condensed mean? Condensed means that we've kind of taken all the extra details out and we've shrunk the play down to its most essential action. Okay? So this is not going to suffice for our overall knowledge of the play, but rather it's going to be kind of the first step. If we think of understanding Macbeth as a staircase, we're going to begin on this step, which is a simple condensed summary. We're going to move to a more sophisticated synopsis, and finally we're going to get to step 3, which is going to be our close reading and our analysis. Okay, so if we're going to turn Macbeth into kind of 5 steps of plot for our initial condensed summary of the play's action and events, the first thing we want to think about is that in Macbeth, 3 witches prophesy that Macbeth, a Scottish general and nobleman, will be King of Scotland. As we're going to see, Macbeth has just finished winning a battle against a traitor to King Duncan. And when he's with his friend Banquo, to whom we'll be introduced, he's leaving the battle and he encounters 3 witches, and they prophesy that he will be King of Scotland. Okay? By the word, to prophecy means to predict the future. And, you know, as soon as they predict that Macbeth's going to be King of Scotland, he starts thinking, is this true? And maybe begins thinking, what would I have to do to become king? Because there already is a king, right? And these are kind of the seeds of betrayal that are planted in Macbeth. Here we have a painting by Thomas Barker, an important 19th century English painter, entitled Macbeth and the 3 Witches. And we can actually see some important information about the play here in this painting, showing Macbeth's encounter with the witches. And a couple things that I want to point out. Again, some of you might be asking, Edward, why are we looking at painting? This is not a course on art history. Well, I want to introduce us to some of the details of Macbeth through some of the most important artistic renderings of Macbeth that have happened through the ages. And as we're going to get a hint of in this second section of our course, some of the most important painters, such as Thomas Barker, have actually chosen to depict scenes from Macbeth. And traditionally, these artists would have depicted scenes from classical Greek and Roman literature. So the fact that we see important artists throughout the ages choosing to depict scenes from Macbeth shows that historically, this play has been held at the highest level of literary significance, worthy of the subject of really important painters throughout the ages. So here we see Macbeth. Now, of course, you might imagine Macbeth a little different. And here we see the 3 witches. A couple of things we can notice. What do the witches look like here? Are they pleasant to look at, or are they sort of scary? I think when we look at their facial expressions, right, the witches are portrayed as scary. They're kind of portrayed as powerful. And when we look at Macbeth here, who is really a renowned warrior and general who has just finished a huge victory in a battle, does he look very powerful here? I mean, he has his sword, right? But he's not holding his sword in his hand about to strike. Rather, he has it down. He's in a posture of weakness, right? And Macbeth here, even his facial expression, you know, we notice seems a little bit more passive, we can say. And the reason why I bring all of this up is because here Thomas Barker is kind of advancing an interpretation of this key pivotal event in Macbeth. And his interpretation seems to be that the witches are exerting a lot of power on Macbeth. Okay? And of course, the scene that we see here, let's take a quick look at the text here that we see on our screen. Here, the first, second, and third witch, they kind of mirror each other in greeting Macbeth. By the way, this word hail means to greet, especially a king or very important person. And they greet him according to 3 different titles. As we said last time, Thane is a title of nobility, like duke or governor is a title of position today, right? So they greet him as Thane of Glamis. They greet him as Thane of Cawdor, and they greet him as king. Now, to Macbeth's knowledge, only one of these things is true so far. Right now, he is Thane of Glamis. The Thane of Cawdor, Macbeth believes, is still alive. So Macbeth's thinking, wait a second, how could I be Thane of Cawdor? He's still alive. Well, as we're going to learn, the Thane of Cawdor is going to be executed, and Duncan, the king, will say that Macbeth is rewarded for his loyalty, and he'll get to be Thane of Cawdor. And finally, they greet him as king, which is the most troubling because there already is a king, and as we're going to discuss in our third section, the idea of questioning the reign of the king in Shakespeare's world is a grave sin and almost a crime even to think about unseating the rightful king on the throne. Okay, so again, this first event is Macbeth's encounter with the witches. Again, for the sake of our condensed plot summary as the first step to our understanding Shakespeare's Macbeth, if we were going to posit a second event in this kind of 5-step simplified story, it would be that Macbeth, with the help of his wife, decides to murder the king to fulfill the prophecy. Okay, so really, we see his wife, Lady Macbeth. So we see Lady Macbeth taking on an incredibly important role, beginning in the middle and towards the end of Act 1. Okay? Again, we have a painting here that kind of captures this moment. This is by Henry Fuseli, and it's entitled Lady Macbeth Seizing the Daggers. Fuseli did a number of paintings inspired by Shakespeare's Macbeth. When we take a look at this, a couple things I want to point out. When we take a look at Fuseli's painting here, it gives us a glimpse into one of the most important moments in Macbeth that we're going to look at more closely when we move into our close reading of the text in later sections in this course. But here we have Macbeth, and here we have Lady Macbeth, right? And you'll notice that Macbeth is carrying the daggers. In this scene, Macbeth has just murdered the king. And even though he went into this murder feeling very courageous and powerful, we can see on the look on the face here that Macbeth finishes the murder and he's very afraid. One of the elements of Macbeth that is interesting is this kind of transition that happens in a ferocious, victorious warrior who kills a traitor. And he kills him very brutally, it's described in the text. So Macbeth has probably killed hundreds of people in battle before. So when he thinks about murdering Duncan, he probably thinks, no big deal. I've killed many people in battle. But after committing the crime, Macbeth is very frightened. And psychologically, he suffers from guilt and paranoia and a whole range of emotions that ultimately undo him. And we see that captured here on Macbeth's face. Now, if we look at Lady Macbeth, we'll notice that she seems very strong. Look at her face, right? She's in a powerful position. Look how she's kind of leaning in, right? Whereas Macbeth is leaning back, he's in a weak position. And indeed, at this moment in the play, Lady Macbeth is the figure who's kind of influencing Macbeth and convincing him to kill Duncan and to cover up the crime. And when Macbeth comes back with the daggers, it's Lady Macbeth who takes the daggers, goes back to the scene of the crime, and plants them on Duncan's guards to make it look like they were the murderers. If we take a look really quickly at the text that corresponds to this moment in the play, Macbeth returns And what does he say? He says, I am afraid to think what I have done. And by the way, what has he done? He has just committed murder, right? He murdered Duncan, the King of Scotland. And he says that he does not dare to look at it again. What is it? The dead body of the king and the scene of the crime. You know, one thing that's interesting we might mention is that Shakespeare chooses for Macbeth to use pronouns, what and it, to describe his crime. It's almost as if he needs to code the reality of his murder in pronouns in order to distance himself from how horrendous the act he committed is. We'll talk more about these kind of textual niceties in later sections in our course. But Macbeth admitted, and she says, give me the dagger. She speaks in a command to her powerful husband, or supposedly powerful husband, and she goes and she plants the daggers on the bodies of Duncan's guards to frame them. In other words, to make people believe that it was Duncan's guards who murdered him, the king, and not Macbeth, the supposedly noble general and thane. Okay, if we move on to the third moment in our condensed, simplified summary of Shakespeare's important play Macbeth, we might summarize it as saying that Macbeth becomes paranoid, feeling he must continue murdering his rivals and opponents to secure his reign and legacy. Paranoid is a word we use to denote a psychological condition or a tendency to suspect other people of wanting to do you harm. So Macbeth has committed a crime, and he begins thinking, what if other people know? What if other people are out to get me? And this thought process is an important element of what leads him to his tragic demise, as we're going to see. Secondly, who does he murder? He murders his rivals, in other words, people he thinks are going to threaten his power, and his opponents. And why is he murdering them? To secure his reign. The word reign here means his ruling as king, his kingly power, and his legacy. And the word legacy here means the children that come after him, right? As we're going to see, Macbeth, although curiously he doesn't have a son or daughter in the play, he really wants to make sure that when he dies, it's his line, his children, who stay King of Scotland. And one of the most important moments that occurs really right after the climax of the play, as we're going to see, and in this painting by Theodore Chassereau, entitled Macbeth Seeing the Ghost of Banquo, Macbeth has just murdered his friend, who he believes to be a rival based on the witch's prophecy, and he's holding a banquet with all the Scottish noblemen. And it's very important because Macbeth has just been crowned king. But Macbeth sees the ghost of Banquo, and he becomes very frightened and begins behaving very strangely. Let's take a closer look at this painting to understand this really important moment in the play. Okay, so a couple things we see in this painting. First of all, the subject of the painting seems to be Banquo. And we can tell from the lighting here that Banquo is a ghost, right? And really a question we have to ask ourselves is the ghost of Banquo really there, or is Macbeth beginning to go crazy and seeing things in his head? But in any case, we can tell that Macbeth, right? Notice Macbeth here is wearing the crown. He's already been crowned king, and presumably this is Lady Macbeth here, right? You'll notice that Macbeth is looking right at Banquo. But if we look closely in the painting, the other people aren't really looking at Banquo. This guy, for example, he seems to be looking somewhere over here, right? And this guy in the background, he's looking somewhere up here as well. So Macbeth is the only one in this painting who is seeing Banquo. And everyone else thinks he's behaving very strangely, and they're probably starting to wonder, why does Macbeth seem so strange? Could he have been the one to kill Duncan? Is he being haunted by guilt, by the ghost of people he has killed? Right? And it's this thought process that begins to bring about the events that will result in Macbeth's fall from power and his death ultimately in Act 5. So if we look really quickly at the text that depicts the moment in the play that this painting also seems to depict, we can glean some important information to help our understanding of this key third step in the condensed summary of Macbeth's plot. So you'll notice the different characters speaking here are Ross, Macbeth, Lennox, Macbeth, and then the lords in general, right? So Ross and Lennox, as we're going to see, are both Scottish noblemen. And if you think about it, Macbeth wants these noblemen to have confidence in him and to believe that he is a capable king and the rightful king. So the last thing Macbeth wants to do is to behave strangely and oddly in front of these noblemen, because these are the next highest people in power in society after him, the king. So Ross says, "Please it, your highness, to grace us with your royal company." Okay, so basically he's asking Macbeth to come and be seated. So this moment in the text opens up with Ross inviting Macbeth to come and sit with him and the other noblemen at the table at the banquet, right? He says, "Please it, your highness, to grace us with your royal company." Basically, he's saying, "Come, sit with us." And Macbeth responds, "The table is already full." And the reason why he says that is because who is sitting in Macbeth's seat? The ghost of Banquo, whom he has just had murdered. But of course, to the other guests at the banquet, they see an empty chair. But Macbeth thinks that a ghost is sitting in it. So really the dialogue here, or the conversation, highlights this difference in perception between Macbeth and his guests that lead his guests, the Scottish nobility, to think that the king is beginning to go crazy. One more point that I'm going to make is that the witch's prophecy that Banquo's children will be king, which is one of the things that Macbeth finds most troubling. So for Banquo to be sitting in Macbeth's place kind of suggests that Banquo is taking on the role of Macbeth. And indeed, according to that prophecy, his children will take on the role of Scottish king, not Macbeth's children. So the fact that Banquo is seated at the table is really important in terms of plot for what it reveals about Macbeth's mindset and his growing paranoia and his hallucinations. But it's also important because it reflects that first prophecy and how it says that Banquo's children will supersede Macbeth's children, or his line, in becoming Scottish king. As we move on in our condensed plot summary, we arrive at what might be the fourth moment in this very simplified and essentialized version of Macbeth's plot. And this is when an army forms to overthrow Macbeth. Macbeth, however, misinterprets a second prophecy to mean that no one will defeat him. So one of the interesting things about Macbeth that we're going to see later on in our thematic analysis in section 12 is that Macbeth is very circular in its plot. There's a lot of doubling. Things that happen once tend to happen again in a different way. So the first prophecy, Macbeth and Banquo accidentally stumble upon the witches. But later, when Macbeth begins going crazy and begins doubting, whether or not people are questioning his right to rule Scotland, he goes and he visits the witches a second time because he wants more answers. And this is the scene that's depicted in this painting, again by Henry Fuseli. This is entitled Macbeth Consulting the Vision of the Armed Head. Let's take a look. So, in this second prophecy or prediction that the witches make to Macbeth, they show him an image of an armed head. And what do we mean by armed? Well, armed here means armor, right? So the armed head is wearing a helmet, is simply what that means. And this is important for a number of reasons. For one thing, spoiler alert, Macbeth dies because his head is chopped off by Macduff. So when the witches show this prophecy to Macbeth, they say, "Beware the Thane of Fife, beware Macduff." So it foreshadows the fact that Macbeth is going to be killed by Macduff in Act 5. And the fact that they show him a head foreshadows the fact that Macbeth will die by having his head chopped off, which again is another element of circularity, because in the beginning of Macbeth, we learn that after Macbeth kills the traitor, he cuts off his head. So this decapitation happens twice, once at the beginning of the play and once at the end. Once Macbeth is doing the decapitation, and once it's happening to him. Okay, so we're going to investigate that a little more closely as our course progresses. A couple other things I want to point out here in this painting. First of all, Fuseli tends to depict Macbeth as quite young and beardless. Now, historically, Scottish people at this time probably would have worn a beard. So the fact that Macbeth doesn't have a beard, he has a smooth face, shows that he's young and that he's boyish. And perhaps I like to think that Fuseli is choosing to depict Macbeth in this way because we associate youth and boyishness with vulnerability. What does vulnerability mean? It means weakness, or kind of able to be hurt or damaged by other people. And in this scene, Macbeth is indeed vulnerable because the witches are prophesizing to him in a way that ultimately confuses him and leads him to misinterpret his fate and ultimately to die by being decapitated by Macbeth. So really, Fuseli depicts this important moment in what we would call the falling action of Macbeth, as we'll see, when things go from good when he's king to not so good as he needs to keep murdering people, and eventually he himself gets murdered. Let's take a look at the text here, right? First of all, we have a stage direction. There's thunder. Something we're going to see is that throughout the play, there's always kind of stormy weather and nighttime. So the weather, the thunder, and the lightning kind of creates a dark, supernatural atmosphere that reflects the evil deeds happening in Macbeth and kind of makes us as the readers or the audience feel that things are not as they should be, bad things are happening. We see the first apparition of an armed head. An apparition means like a ghost or a vision, right? Something that appears. And Macbeth says, "Tell me, thou unknown power," right? And the first witch replies, "He knows thy thought. Hear his speech, but say thou naught." And the first apparition says, "Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth, beware Macduff." Right? And again, who is Macduff? Macduff is the Scottish nobleman who will kill Macbeth and chop off his head. The fifth moment in our condensed, essentialized plot summary of Shakespeare's Macbeth occurs when Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, the conspirators who killed Duncan, are ultimately destroyed. So Lady Macbeth, who has also begun to go crazy, as we'll see in Act 5, commits suicide. Macbeth is defeated in battle, and as we said, he is decapitated. And the son of the former king claims his right to the Scottish throne, right? And the son of the former king, by the way, is Malcolm, right? So here we see a painting by Dante Gabriel Rossetti entitled "The Death of Lady Macbeth." So if we look for a second at Rossetti's artistic depiction of this important moment in Act 5 of Shakespeare's Macbeth, in this engraving, right, we see Lady Macbeth is the subject. Here we have Lady Macbeth. We can notice, based on her posture here, look at her arms. This is a position of weakness, not a position of power. Lady Macbeth is introduced in the play as almost a tigress, an incredibly powerful and ferocious woman. Indeed, perhaps the most powerful female character in any of Shakespeare's plays. But because of the murder, and because of the paranoia, and because of the way her husband has begun murdering more and more people, Lady Macbeth has become undone. She too is beginning to suffer mental illness and is actually sleepwalking at night. And while she's sleeping, she's revealing information about the crimes she and her husband committed. So this moment happens just before Lady Macbeth's death. We can notice there's a lot of darkness in this scene. What does the darkness represent? Probably hopelessness. Perhaps it foreshadows the tragedy that is to befall Lady Macbeth and her husband a little bit later in the play. We also notice that these figures in the background, these curtains, are windblown, right? So we have this impression that, again, it's a stormy night, which kind of suggests chaos, right? And this kind of supernatural element, as if fate is buffeting about Lady Macbeth and Macbeth in the final moments of their lives before they both die. So I think this painting really aptly captures the chaos and the confusion, and in the final moments before the death of Lady Macbeth, and a little bit later on, the death of her husband, Macbeth. And really, the death of Lady Macbeth does not happen on stage. And this is a convention of historical drama. The murder of Duncan doesn't actually happen on stage. Instead, Macbeth says, "I'm going to kill Duncan." And then in the next scene, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are talking about how Macbeth killed Duncan. Similarly, the suicide of Lady Macbeth doesn't actually happen on the stage. Instead, Satan comes to Macbeth and reports Lady Macbeth is dead. And later, we find out that she died by killing herself. One thing I want to point out here is that the character who announces that Lady Macbeth, the queen, is dead is a character named Satan. And this name Satan is spelled S-E-Y-T-O-N, but it sounds the same as this other word in English, Satan, which means the devil. So the fact that one of the few people who remains loyal to Macbeth in the final moments of his life is named Satan may imply that Macbeth has the devil by his side. All the good people, the angels, as it were, have fled and are no longer loyal to Macbeth. But Satan, the devil, remains loyal. And of course, this would emphasize that what Macbeth has done is very evil and is even a crime against God, as we're going to talk about in section 3. But of course, a quick caveat, no one really knows what Shakespeare was trying to do. We don't know if he was trying to create this association between Satan the character and Satan the devil. But I think it's worth mentioning, as a lot of people have brought up that possibility. A question you might ask yourself at home is, what are some other paintings that have depicted the story of Macbeth? And when you're looking at these paintings, think about, who are the characters depicted? What moments in the play do they relate to? How does the artist imagine the characters? What role do color, line, shape play in the painting? Many times there's a strong connection between art history and literary history. And the way we see Macbeth depicted by famous painters over the ages is one important way of recognizing that connection.